Have you ever felt the suffocating grip of a love story that is actually a beautifully disguised cage? We have been spoon-fed this toxic poison for far too long, a trembling, naive girl waiting for salvation, and a so-called alpha, whose obsession, violent jealousy, and stifling control are romanticized as destiny. They call it passion. I call it the complete assassination of a woman's soul. But today, we are burning that script to ashes. This is not a tale for those who seek the comfort of blind submission. This is a visceral journey of a woman who shatters toxic prejudices, tears down suffocating walls, and seizes her crown, not with a pretty face, not by playing the submissive mate, but with sheer intellect, relentless resilience, and a heart forged in absolute ice. Wolf King Stories US warmly welcomes you. If you are ready to witness the rise of a true queen, hit that subscribe button right now. Your support is the roaring fire that fuels us to bring you more epic, convention-defying tales like this one. Let us begin with a chilling truth that defined our protagonist's entire existence. For as long as she could remember, Gallea Hawk had been the wrong kind of daughter. Let those words sink into your bones for a moment. Why wrong? Imagine being born into a world that only respects the stench of blood. The Hawk clan is a ruthless, militaristic pack where muscle, aggression, and the primal instinct to slaughter are the sole currencies of worth. If your hands cannot tear flesh from bone, you are less than nothing. You are a defect. And Gallea? Her soul was woven with the threads of a healer. Her hands were not destined to swing broadswords or gouge out eyes. They were born to grind herbs, to mend shattered bones, to stitch together torn flesh, and to rip lives back from the very jaws of death. Yet, in a family that worshipped the Grim Reaper, her desperate yearning to heal was deemed the ultimate blasphemy. This brutal paradox forced Gallea into a merciless tragedy. She was entirely ostracized by her own blood, looked upon with disgust, and treated as a humiliating stain on the pack's legacy. In the eyes of her father, the towering alpha of the Hawk clan, her brilliant medical mind was worth less than the dirt beneath a mindless warrior's claw. When a child grows up breathing the toxic air of constant rejection, their psyche fractures in one of two ways. They either crumble into self-destruction and surrender, or they retreat into the shadows, silently sharpening their broken pieces into lethal blades. Gallea chose the darkness. She hoarded her passion, studying anatomy and medicine in absolute secrecy, transforming her profound loneliness into an impregnable fortress of intellect. Then came the catalyst, an event designed to be her ultimate demise, which ironically became her greatest launchpad. Exhausted by endless bloodshed, the Hawk clan desperately needed a peace treaty with the formidable Thornfield pack. And naturally, the wrong daughter, the useless defect, became the perfect sacrificial lamb. Gallea was sold. Reduced to a political pawn, a mere object of transaction, she was shipped off to a foreign wolf territory to buy peace for the very monsters who had discarded her. The agonizing realization of being entirely stripped of her autonomy, of being tossed aside like worthless collateral, ignited a quiet, terrifying inferno within her. She stepped onto Thornfield soil not with the pathetic gratitude of a spared life, nor with the delusion of a blushing bride. She walked in as a hostage. But what they didn't know was that in the absolute depths of this despair, the chessboard of destiny was already being flipped. Stepping into the shadowy, frost-bitten domain of the Thornfield pack, Gallea knew her survival depended not on bared teeth, but on an impenetrable armor of calculated indifference. I want you to picture the scene as those heavy iron gates slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate in a foreign land. Most tales would have our heroine weeping in her chambers, waiting for the brooding, misunderstood alpha to barge in and claim her. But Gallea did not shed a single tear. She unpacked her meager belongings, which consisted entirely of medical texts, dried herbs, and surgical instruments, and she began to meticulously study her new cage. The Thornfield pack was a beast of a different nature, wealthier, more strategic, but plagued by a mysterious lethargy that seemed to seep from the very soil into the bones of its people. Alpha Kaelen, the man she was supposed to call her mate, was a towering figure of quiet, lethal authority. He expected a terrified pawn, a spy, or perhaps a weeping girl begging for mercy. What he got was a ghost. Gallea offered him absolute, chilling compliance on the surface, while beneath it, she was mapping every vulnerability his pack possessed. She refused to play the victim, and equally, she refused to play the loving bride. When Kaelen attempted to establish dominance through the traditional, suffocating alpha commands, her response was a gaze so intensely vacant and analytical that it unnerved him. She looked at him not as a master, but as a puzzle. You see, Gallea quickly realized that the Thornfield wolves were suffering. A subtle, chronic affliction was weakening their young and their elders, something their traditional shamanic healers attributed to a curse of the gods. But to a mind forged in the relentless solitary pursuit of science and anatomy, there are no curses, only symptoms waiting to be decoded. She began her work in the shadows, sneaking into the lower quarters, observing the water supplies, the soil, the diet. She was a hostage who had silently decided to become the most dangerous piece on the board, the one holding the cure. This is where the narrative completely shifts from the toxic romanticization of captivity. Gallea was not waiting for Kaelen to see her worth. She was actively constructing a scenario where her worth would become the undisputed law of the land. She weaponized her intellect, understanding that in a world governed by brute strength, the mind is the only tool capable of slicing through bone without spilling a drop of blood. She didn't seek Kaelin's bed, nor his affection. She sought leverage. And as she silently brewed antidotes in the dead of night, extracting toxins from local flora with the precision of an assassin, Gallea was no longer the wrong daughter of the Hawk clan. She was a master tactician, weaving a silent web of life and death that would soon bring the entire Thornfield hierarchy to its knees. Yet, the true test of her hidden arsenal arrived not in the quiet corridors of power, but amidst the frantic, blood-soaked chaos of an unforeseen catastrophe. A brutal, unprecedented ambush at the northern borders left a dozen of Thornfield's most elite warriors, including Alpha Kaelin's own brother, clinging to life by a violently fraying thread. I can vividly see the panic that gripped the pack that night, the chaotic screams, the stench of ruptured organs, the helpless, archaic chants of the pack healers, who could do nothing but apply useless poultices to severed arteries. Kaelen was a man accustomed to control, yet here he was, watching his bloodline bleed out on the cold stone floor, entirely powerless. This was the moment, the exact second where the axis of power permanently tilted. Gallea did not ask for permission to enter the medical hall. She breached those doors with the authority of a battlefield commander. When Kaelen roared for her to leave, demanding to know what the Hawk's useless pawn thought she was doing, she did not flinch. She simply walked past him, a scalpel gleaming in her steady hand, and issued a command that sent a shockwave of silence through the room. If you want them to live, you will all step back and do exactly as I say. If you want them to die, keep chanting. It is a rare, breathtaking thing to witness a woman completely strip a room of men of their supposed superiority with a single, icy sentence. She didn't rely on a magical, fated mate aura to command the room. She relied on undeniable, absolute competence. For the next 10 hours, Gallea was a force of nature. She stitched torn veins, realigned shattered femurs, and administered the very serums she had been secretly synthesizing since her arrival. Her hands, long deemed a disgusting defect by her father, moved with a divine, rhythmic violence, snatching souls back from the Grim Reaper's grasp. She was covered to her elbows in Thornfield blood, but for the first time in her life, it was not the blood of slaughter, it was the blood of salvation. When the morning sun finally broke through the stained glass, every single warrior she had touched was breathing. Stable. Alive. Kaelen stood in the corner, his alpha pride entirely dismantled, staring at the woman he had treated as collateral damage. She didn't wait for his gratitude. She dropped her bloody rags at his feet, looked him dead in the eye, and delivered her terms. She demanded absolute autonomy, full control over the pack's resources, and the unquestionable title of Chief Medical Officer. She was no longer a peace treaty bride. She had just bought her own freedom with the lives of his men. In one night, Gallea proved that the ability to heal requires far more courage, resilience, and power than the ability to destroy. Having pulled his people from the abyss of death, the dynamic between the sacrificial lamb and the fearsome alpha permanently fractured, giving way to an unprecedented alliance of equals. If you are expecting this to be the part where Kaelen suddenly becomes overly possessive, growling at any male who looks at her while she blushes and surrenders her independence, you are entirely in the wrong place. What grew between Kaelen and Gallea was something far more profound, something that makes those cliché, toxic tropes look like cheap parlor tricks. It was a romance anchored in the heavy, undeniable gravity of mutual respect. Kaelen did not fall in love with her scent or some mystical, unavoidable destiny. He fell in awe of her mind. He watched her revolutionize his pack. She implemented sanitation protocols, rebuilt their dietary systems, and trained a new generation of healers, effectively eradicating the chronic lethargy that had plagued them for years. She was a builder in a world of destroyers. And Kaelen, unlike her narrow-minded father, was intelligent enough to recognize a true partner. He didn't try to lock her away for her own safety. He built her a laboratory. He didn't try to speak for her in council meetings. He deferred to her judgment on matters of internal pack survival. Their intimacy was not born from aggressive dominance in the bedroom, but from late-night strategy sessions over sprawling maps, from the quiet, shared burdens of leadership, and from the realization that they were too brilliant, Hardened souls who had finally found someone who spoke their exact language. Gallea, in turn, allowed the ice around her heart to thaw, but only on her own terms. She learned that vulnerability, when given to a man who views you as his absolute equal, is not a weakness, but a profound strength. She saw Kaelen's willingness to adapt, his dedication to the prosperity of his people over his own ego, and she chose him. Let me emphasize that word, chose. She was not bound by a biological mandate or forced into submission by a mating bite. She consciously elected to stand beside him, intertwining her strategic genius with his military might. They became a terrifying, perfectly balanced dichotomy, the sword and the suture, the tactician and the general. It is a breathtaking revelation to realize that the most passionate love stories are not the ones where a woman loses herself in a man, but the ones where a man is strong enough to stand in the brilliant, blinding light of a woman's unchained potential without casting a shadow over it. This hard-won sanctuary of mutual reverence, however, was destined to face its ultimate trial when the ghosts of her abusive past marched upon Thornfield's borders. The Hawk clan, facing starvation and internal rebellion due to their relentless warmongering, sought to exploit the peace treaty they had forced upon Gallea. Her father arrived at the gates with an army, expecting his broken, subservient daughter to open the doors from the inside, viewing her merely as a Trojan horse he had planted months ago. He expected a terrified girl to betray her new home to earn the scraps of his approval. But the woman who stood atop the stone battlements was a stranger to him. She stood not behind Kaelen, but beside him, draped in the heavy furs of Thornfield royalty, her gaze as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. She didn't scream, and she didn't wield a sword. She simply unrolled a scroll. With surgical precision, Gallea dismantled her father's siege before a single arrow was nocked. She had spent months analyzing the Hawk clan's supply routes, their internal political fractures, and their agricultural failures. She didn't fight him with brute force. She fought him with an economic and strategic checkmate. She calmly informed her father that Thornfield now controlled the only viable trade routes for the medicinal herbs his dying warriors desperately needed. Herbs only she knew how to cultivate and administer. If they attacked, they would die of their own festering wounds within a month. She had effectively neutered the most aggressive military force in the region, using nothing but intelligence, foresight, and the very medical knowledge he had once cursed. Watching the towering, tyrannical alpha of the Hawk clan realize he had been completely outmaneuvered by the wrong daughter is a flavor of poetic justice that is rarely served so perfectly. He was forced to order his men to stand down, retreating in absolute humiliation, his legacy forever eclipsed by the child he threw away. In that moment, Gallea did not just secure the safety of Thornfield. She redefined what it meant to hold power in the wolf world. The pack did not bow to her because Kaelen ordered it, nor because of a superficial crown placed upon her head. They bowed because she was their savior, their architect, their undisputed queen. This is the story we should be telling. A testament that you are not defined by the narrow, toxic expectations of those who are too blind to see your brilliance. If they call you the wrong kind of daughter, the wrong kind of woman, or a defect, it is only because your destiny is far too massive to fit inside their tiny, archaic cages. Thank you for walking this incredible journey with Wolf King Stories US. If Gallea's triumph ignited a fire in your soul, make sure you subscribe and leave your thoughts below. Until next time, remember, never apologize for the sharpness of your mind. Conclusion. Gallea's journey from a discarded pawn to the undisputed Queen of Thornfield is a masterclass in resilience and the quiet, devastating power of intellect. Thrust into a hostile environment that expected her to either cower in fear or surrender to the traditional submission of a mate, she instead chose to rewrite the rules of her own survival. By weaponizing her mind and her medical expertise, she did not just save lives, she systematically dismantled the archaic, patriarchal structures that sought to oppress her. Her victory over her abusive father and her forging of a true, equal partnership with Alpha Kaelen proves that true power is not measured by the sharpness of one's fangs, but by the depth of one's strategic foresight. Gallea transformed her supposed defects into her greatest arsenal, turning captivity into a chessboard where she was always 5 moves ahead. She refused to be a victim, a traditional bride, or a casualty of war. Instead, she became an architect of life and a conqueror, wielding the ultimate weapon, knowledge. Her story fundamentally shatters the toxic romanticization of weakness, leaving us with a breathtaking blueprint of female empowerment. It is a resounding declaration that when you stop trying to fit into the small cages built by others, you can construct an empire entirely on your own terms. The profound lesson. The most profound takeaway from Gallea's triumph is that undeniable competence is the ultimate equalizer. Society will often label your unique traits as flaws or defects simply because they do not fit into traditional expected molds. However, true power does not come from changing who you are to appease others. It comes from quietly and relentlessly honing your unique skills until your value becomes absolute and impossible to ignore. Application to daily life. In your modern life, stop apologizing for the traits that make you different. If you are stepping into a challenging environment, whether it is a competitive new workplace, a difficult personal relationship, or a toxic family dynamic, do not seek validation or play the victim. Instead, become a tactician. Observe the needs and vulnerabilities of your environment and use your specific knowledge, passions, or skills to provide real solutions. Build your leverage through excellence. When you focus on cultivating your mind and capabilities, you will naturally command respect rather than having to beg for it. Furthermore, only choose partners and environments that respect your intellect and treat you as an equal. Never shrink your potential just to cast a smaller shadow for someone else's comfort. Question for you. What is a unique skill, passion, or personality trait you possess that others may have misunderstood in the past, but that you are incredibly proud of today? Please share your answer with us in the comments section below. We would love to read your perspectives so everyone can learn from each other's unique strengths. If Gallea's story ignited a fire in your soul, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Your subscription gives us the tremendous motivation needed to keep creating more high-quality, empowering content for you.